we could like sit in a semicircle, because since there's only 3 of us, it would be much more intimate and better that way. But and a 4th. But anyway, it's not that way, so I'll stand up here and chat. My name's Catherine Walton, and I'm an early intervention specialist here at the Center for Autism. I oversee the Early Achievements Classroom here, which is a group that we have for children ages 2 to 3 years old. And so I oversee that program, and then I also teach in there. So if I look a little disheveled right now, it's because I literally just ran from group this morning in here as the kids were walking out the door. So that's my background. My master's is in special education, and then my undergraduate degree is in speech pathology. I've been working here at the Center for Autism for 14 years now, and before that I was a paraprofessional and substitute teacher in special education classrooms in the Baltimore County school system as well. Along with being in the classroom, I do a lot of training with teachers, paraprofessionals, and early intervention assistants in the school system in Baltimore County, PG County, and also we've been working a lot on the Eastern Shore now as well. So I'm kind of all over the place, and for the most part now I'm with the little tiny guys, as I said, 2 to 3 year olds, but I've been with children up through about 2nd grade age. And today, the information that I'm going to give you is just very basic information about autism. It's kind of Autism 101, just very basic starter information for you. And so, since there's only 4 of us, maybe can we go around and everybody say sort of what your relationship is to someone with autism, be it teacher, assistant, parent, grandparent, sister, brother. You don't have to say your name if you don't want to, but just how you're related to someone with autism. Okay. Okay.
Sophie Moore, and I'm not related to anyone with autism as well. It's a basic interest in knowing more.
Okay, great.
Alyssa Coop, I am a MSW trainee here at Krieger, and so I'm just kind of getting a better overview.
Okay, great.
Couple family members that want to know.
Okay, great. And as we go to, you'll see a few other people come in. I know there's a couple of our staff members that are coming, because this is the first time that I've given this talk, and so people are just curious about this as well. So we'll get started. So first of all, what is autism? And I know you're going to probably know some of this information, so you can just take it in as reminders as well, but hopefully there's some new information for you as well. Well, 1 in 68 American children are diagnosed with autism. And I put up here also that in the year 2000, the prevalence was 1 in 150. And the reason that I put that up there is just for that to sink in for a minute, how significant it is that in 15 years, the prevalence has increased that much. No one's exactly sure why that is. Some people you hear say it's because more children are being diagnosed, just that there's more awareness of autism, but there's no definite answer for why this increase is happening. It's 5 times more likely to occur in boys than girls. And so if you look at the groups that you have here, they are almost entirely made up of boys. The groups that we have in our Early Achievements program right now, my morning class is all boys, and the afternoon class, there's 2 girls in there. But usually we see a lot more boys than we do girls. It's reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. And so there's no specific, more Caucasians, more African Americans that we see come through here. We see the gamut in our population. It occurs when the brain develops differently, which causes people with autism to have trouble making sense of the world. And I'm going to talk more as I go through the slides about exactly what that means. No one knows what causes autism. We have a great research department here at the Center for Autism, and they're looking at a lot of different things. Genetics, it is pretty widely accepted now in the field of research that genetics likely has a part to play in autism. And here we're looking at early signs. So we look at siblings of children with autism to see if we start seeing, because siblings tend to be more likely to have autism. They have a higher likelihood of having autism. And so we start looking at them to see what the earliest signs that we can see are, or early red flags for autism. People with autism have various degrees of difficulty communicating with others and participating in daily activities. And I'm going to talk more about that as well. And there's no cure for autism, but there is treatment. The one thing that's known, and there are a lot of unknowns about autism, but the one thing that's known is that early intervention makes a difference for children with autism. And so that's why here we start very early with children. I said the kids in my program are between 2 and 3 years old, but we also have 1-year-olds that come in for treatment in more of a mommy and me type group here. And children start coming in for evaluations very early as well. So again, this is a good thing, and maybe this is why we're seeing the prevalence increase, is that people are more aware of it and they're starting to be diagnosed earlier, but no one's sure. So what are the core deficits of autism? Communication is a huge core deficit in autism. Here, the groups that we have here are considered group speech language therapy. Most people with autism have some sort of need for speech services. So be it that they have difficulty communicating, they don't have much language, or the language that they have isn't what you would typically expect in someone their age, or maybe they have great language, but they have trouble with social interactions. So more pragmatic language, being able to put sentences together and being able to interact appropriately in social situations. Also stereotyped behaviors. And so I think sometimes people that don't know very much about autism, the stereotyped behaviors might be the #1 thing that you think of if you picture in your head someone with autism. The flapping, walking on their toes, maybe looking at something out of the corner of their eye or not making eye contact with you. But that's just one of the pieces of the deficits of autism. So before I start this talk, I always like to say some things that are great about people with autism, because I think sometimes you get stuck in, oh, they have so much to learn, there's so much that they need treatment for, but really there are a lot of great things as well. First of all, they say what you mean. They say what they mean. If someone with autism tells you that they like your shirt, they really like your shirt. They're not just saying it because they're trying to be nice. They are very direct and they're going to say what they mean. If they're upset, it's for a good reason. And so some people that you know might get upset about things for, various reasons. For someone with autism, there's a reason. Maybe they're overstimulated by sensory input that's coming in, and I'm going to talk more about that. Maybe they're not able to communicate their wants and needs. There's a good reason for upsets in people with autism. Many people with autism are passionate learners, and they're going to know more about their favorite topics than anybody else. And so I've given this talk to volunteers at the Walters Art Museum that do tours there, and I always say to them, you should be excited if you have someone with autism in your tour group, because probably they're going to be the ones that are the most interested in what you're telling them about the paintings. They usually are very interested in certain subjects. And people with autism can have great talents. Some are extraordinary artists, mathematicians, musicians, and more. And this man down here I just put as an example. He's a young man with autism that is able to create these intricate paintings and landscapes just from doing one helicopter ride over top of cities. And so this thing that he's drawing here, I think this is New York City, and he just took a helicopter ride, and from memory he's able to make these intricate drawings. So they can have very special talents as well. You can't tell that someone has autism by the way that they look. So in the pictures that I have up here, there are some people with autism mixed in with some people that do not have autism. It's not like some other disorders or developmental delays where there's specific characteristics in physical features. Just by looking at someone, you can't tell that they have, whether or not they have autism. This can make it very difficult for some of our families when they're out shopping or out in public with their children, and their children start exhibiting a certain behavior because, again, there's a good reason. Maybe it's too bright, maybe it's too loud, and people can't just look at that child and see that they have autism. And so a stranger might think, oh, that parent needs to control their child. Why aren't they taking care of that behavior? Well, it's because the child has autism, and they might need to take different steps to manage that behavior. But again, as just a stranger seeing that, you wouldn't know because you can't tell whether the child has autism or not. People with autism may or may not communicate in the same way. So some people with autism can speak, some people can't. For those that can speak, some have very specific interests. And so for those of you that know or have worked with someone with autism, you may have seen that. Some examples in our kids that we often see are maybe various cartoon characters. They really like Dora, or they really like Thomas the Tank Engine, and they can tell you anything and everything about those characters or those items. Transportation items. I worked with a little boy once that was very interested in maps, and much like the man that could do the intricate drawings from just taking a helicopter ride, this child could tell me which subways, which lines he needed to get on to any location that you would name. And so some people have very specific interests, which is great in some respects. They're passionate learners about that one thing, but also they need to learn how to sort of control those interests and realize what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in terms of talking about those interests with other people. For those that can't speak, many can still understand what's being said to them. I think this is something that's hard for people that don't spend a lot of time with autism as well. That just because the person's not talking to you doesn't mean that they don't hear what you're saying, doesn't mean that they're not listening, and doesn't mean that they don't understand the directions that you're giving them. So it's important that even if someone with autism isn't looking at you, or isn't able to talk to you in the way that you're talking to them, that you still make those attempts to communicate with them. And some people with autism communicate using gestures, pictures, or augmentative communication. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So in terms of communication, many times for someone with autism, frustration occurs because they can't or don't know how to communicate their wants and needs. And so if any of you have traveled to a foreign country and you don't speak the language, it feels that way. Imagine that you're walking down the street in France or Germany or Spain and you don't speak the language there and you're trying to find the bathroom. Imagine how frustrating it is to you communicating to people that are around you, trying to tell them that you need to find the bathroom and they don't understand what you're saying. It's the same way for someone with autism, but maybe they are unable to get the words out. Or again, maybe they don't have a functional means of communication. So it's important that we learn to provide that for them. And so I like this picture as just another example that this is a parking sign, and I don't know if you can or can't see all the directions that are on it, but there's a whole lot of directions about when you can and can't park in this specific area here. And it's really confusing as you look at it. And so again, for us, this is confusing. And if we think about it in terms of someone with autism and think about the directions that we give to them, if we say to someone with autism, go get your book bag, sit down in your chair, take out your math book, and start doing your homework. To them, that may seem to them like this sign seems to us. It's just too many directions. And so we need to be considerate of that as we're talking and working with people with autism. So this is a little guy. Oh, yep, it's going to play, I think. I just want to put this in as an example of a type of communication that someone with autism might use. This is called picture exchange, and I have a book that I can pass around to you all so you can get an idea of what it looks like. This is considered augmentative communication for someone with autism, but it's very low tech, meaning that you don't have to use an iPad or a computer or any sort of device. It's just pictures that are in a book. And basically the purpose of it is to provide functional communication for someone with autism. They take the picture of what they want off of here and they give it to someone. The nice thing about this is that anywhere they go, this is universal. So if I show you all this right now, and as I pass it around, if you can't see from where you are, you'll be able to see. There's a picture of a dollhouse, toy cars, a doll, blocks, and a little person toy. So if a child comes up to you and gives you the picture of the blocks, anybody, grandma, grandpa, the person at McDonald's, their babysitter, is going to understand that they want blocks. As opposed to someone that's using sign language that might use the sign for blocks. And honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know what sign language for blocks is. And so if a child did the sign to blocks to me, I might not know what they were saying. So that's one of the nice things about this. The other nice thing about picture exchange is that it teaches the child that they have to communicate with someone. So it's not just a sheet where they're standing pointing at it, where they could be in a room with nobody there and they're pointing at it. they learn that they actually have to take this off and hand it to someone. Just like when we talk to someone, I'm talking to you and I'm expecting to get some sort of reciprocation back from that. This one I think, there's some sensory toys in here and maybe a couple of snacks, but just so you can kind of get an idea of what a PECS book might look like. I'm going to play the video while you look at that. And I think this little guy is requesting fruit snacks from the person that he's with.
I want fruit snack. Here's a fruit snack.
Okay, and so he's actually a little bit more advanced that he's making an entire sentence. When children first learn to use picture exchange, they just exchange the picture of what they want. As they progress, they might learn to make sentences, as this little guy did. He put a picture that says, I want down, and then a picture of the fruit snacks down, and handed it over to the person. Some other things, actually I might only have one more example, but I can tell you about others. This is slightly higher tech. And so again, it's using the same pictures. If you look at this one and then look at this one, you'll see the pictures look very similar. But this is on a device where, hopefully it's charged. Yeah, this is on a device where when you push the button, it's actually going to say the word as well. So for this, the child would push the button that they want, and then this is going to give them the verbal output as well to say what they're asking for. Let me try to get it on the right one.
Bye.
There we go. So you can play with that as well. We'll start this one in the back. Also, now that iPads are so readily available, a lot of our children might have an iPad or some sort of tablet that they carry around with them that does the exact same thing as these do, or that they could make various sentences with. Thank you. I'm sorry, you didn't have to carry that up. You can put it in the back. Okay. So another big, as we talked about stereotype behaviors, another thing to consider when you're working with or living with someone with autism is the way their senses are affected by having an autism spectrum disorder. So all day, every day, our 5 senses work together to help us understand what's going on in the world around us. You all are sitting here right now, and you're able to kind of not focus on the sound of the air conditioner, although if I'm quiet, you can hear it now. And you're able to not worry too much about the lighting in here. Your bodies have regulated to the lighting in the room. And you know that you came here to hear me talk, and so you're focused on what I'm saying. So all your senses are working together, and maybe somebody's sitting next to you that has on a perfume that you can smell, but you're able to kind of drown that out and realize that you need to be focused on what I'm saying. For someone with autism, they're going to have difficulty using all of their senses together or regulating all of their senses. And that's going to make it hard for them to talk, listen, play, and learn. Some senses for them may be heightened, and so anytime they walk into a room and there's a certain smell, be it a food smell, be it perfume, be it body odor, that sense might be heightened in them, while other senses might be lacking. And so, again, processing, they may not be able, as they're hearing things, they may not be able to understand them as quickly as you and I can. Or using sight, as they see things, again, the processing may be a little bit slower for individuals with autism. So if we think of the senses in autism, what could be some difficulties that someone might have? Well, in terms of hearing, when lots of people are talking at once, it can overwhelm a person with autism. They may or may not be able to decipher what information is important. Other examples of sounds that could be overwhelming: slamming doors, chalk on chalkboards. If we're thinking about students in school, chairs on the floor as kids scoot away from their desks. The teacher's shoes on the floor if they're making a clicking sound. These are all things that, again, we don't think about. We are able to focus on the task at hand. But for someone with autism, it might be more heightened for them, that they're bothered by those sounds. For sight, lighting could bother someone with autism. And so in some of our groups downstairs, we have, this is actually nice overhead lighting in here. It's pretty soft and quiet, but we do have halogen lights downstairs. And we have some groups of children that they're very bothered by those lights and they're very affected by them. And so we've actually gotten covers for the lights that make the rooms almost more blue. It's kind of like a parachute over top of those lights so that it just softens the lighting for them. I mentioned smells. So again, if we're thinking about a classroom setting, things such as paint, dry erase markers or permanent markers when they're opened have a very strong scent. Perfume, if the child's classroom is close to the cafeteria and around lunchtime or around breakfast time, they're smelling those food odors, they could bother someone with autism. Touching, people bumping into each other, and then certain textures or the way certain fabrics feel. So a lot of times we see some of our children with autism at the changes of the season, like what we're going through right now. It's changing from summer to fall, and instead of wearing shorts and t-shirts, we're starting to wear long sleeves and long pants. We might see heightened behaviors or heightened frustrations in some of our children and people that we work with because it's a different feel. I used to just have a feel on the top of my legs of fabric touching me, and now all of a sudden that fabric's going all the way down my legs. And I don't really like the way this sweater feels. It's made of an interesting material, and so it's kind of bothering the bottoms of my arms. We often see that again at the change of seasons. And then taste. People with autism often have specific foods or textures of foods that they prefer. Yeah?
I had a question on, I know you deal with senses, but how does that affect like the immune system? I know it's like a lot of, I guess, kids with autism, like their nose is always snotty. Like, is that something from that, or is something separate?
I mean, that probably comes a lot from the fact that they may not necessarily know to blow their nose and wipe their nose. And in a classroom setting, if you're not careful about cleaning the materials that they're working with, like I know in our class, every day we wipe everything down because exactly all winter long there's runny noses, just kind of in kids in general, whether they have autism or not. I feel like they're sort of sick all year long, but especially if they're not wiping their nose when they need to be wiping their nose and they're not washing their hands when they need to, then it can definitely affect that. And for a child with autism, the adults that are working with them need to be more aware of that because probably the child on their own, and it does have to do with the senses, they may not feel that their nose is running. A child without autism probably realizes that their nose is running and something needs to be done about it. For a child with autism, their nose might be running and it seems like it doesn't bother them because maybe they're not feeling that sensation of that or feeling the sensation of the fact that they're drooling a little bit, which again, that too, very easy to pass germs through both of those things. So the caregivers or teachers that are working with children need to be more aware of that, wiping their noses, wiping their pieces, telling them to blow their nose, telling them to wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. It probably comes more from that end. But yeah, that's an excellent question. So as far as tasting, yeah, we have many children that have specific foods that they like. They may only eat foods of a certain color. I used to work with a little girl that would only eat things that were white or cream colored, and so it was a lot of white cheeses and Cheerios and chicken. I've had other children that don't like crunchy things, and so they'll only eat purees or only eat things that they don't really have to chew, but that's more sort of on the baby food end of things. And so those are things that they may need an occupational therapist or a feeding specialist to work with them on. So I put this picture here because I think I want to give you two examples of, so you can kind of feel what it feels like to have sensory overload. When you come out of a movie theater, or if you've ever been to Vegas or to a casino somewhere and you've spent a long time there and all of a sudden you walk outside and it's the middle of the day and you didn't realize it and the sun hits you, you have to take a minute to kind of adjust to it. But you're able to adjust to it. You take that minute, you stop, you go, oh, it's bright. Squint your eyes for a second, but then after a few minutes, you probably are able to adjust to it. For someone with autism, their bodies sometimes won't let them adjust to that. And so when they walk into our classrooms downstairs with the lights overhead, they're feeling that feeling that you feel when you walk out of the movie theater or walk out of the casino, but it doesn't go away. They're not able to regulate it. And so imagine if you kept having that feeling, Would you be able to drive home if you kept having that feeling that you had immediately when you walked out of the movie theater? Would you be able to concentrate on other things? Maybe, but it would probably be more difficult than it is for you because you can regulate those feelings. Just looking at this picture sometimes gives me the heebie-jeebies because I think we all know this as well. That tag on the back of your shirt, every once in a while you get a shirt that just has a tag that it bothers you so much, and then you cut it out, and that makes it even worse because then you can feel where you cut it and you're just itchy. Well, imagine if you had that feeling, but it wasn't just on the back of your neck, it was over your entire body, because again, you don't like the fabric that the sweater is made out of. Something about it just makes you feel itchy. Again, are you going to be able to concentrate on other things that are going on? Maybe, but it's going to be more difficult for you than it would be for those of us that are able to regulate those feelings. So this is a young lady named Sophie. She's a teenager, and she wrote an article that appeared on the Autism Speaks website about sensory overload. And I wanted to read a snippet of it for you because I just think it's a really good example of how someone with autism might feel and why they're doing certain things. She says, sensory overload is the worst feeling in the world. I get it when I see too many people walking past me or if I hear too many noises at one time. For example, in a room of people talking, my brain tunes into everyone else's conversations and I struggle to filter the voices out and listen to the carer I'm with. It is so frustrating, and I have to be redirected to listening to my carer by them saying my name or tapping me. When I get sensory overload, it's like I have 100 buzzy bees in my head, and my head hurts a lot and feels like it will go bang like a balloon. It's the most uncomfortable thing ever. I have to try to bang my head on things to try to relieve the pressure in my head to stop the feeling. While I'm experiencing sensory overload, I find it very hard to talk or make sentences, as my speech just won't come out as I want it to. And I can't make the words make sense. I don't think anyone can ever truly understand how it feels to experience it. But if you imagine having 50 people trying to talk to you at one time and you need to answer every single one of them, then maybe, just maybe, that's a little insight into what it might feel like. And so again, I just think that gives you a very nice visual of what someone with autism might be feeling. And you might not realize that because to you, you're able to filter out those other voices, or you're able to filter out the other sounds. But for someone with autism, it can be very, very overwhelming. So there are some things in the world that come easily and naturally for most people, but are very difficult for someone with autism. These are things that they have to overcome. So if we think about social skills, making eye contact while interacting with other people. This is one of the red flags that we look for as children or as individuals come in for evaluations here is, are they making eye contact? Are they making natural eye contact? Because often for someone with autism, they have difficulty with that. Adults with autism that are able to express, like Sophie was, some of the feelings they're having, sometimes say that it's actually painful for them to make eye contact with others. Understanding sarcasm and idioms. And so if you say to someone with autism, it's raining cats and dogs, you're pulling my leg. I once had a group of children downstairs that had a lot of language, and one day we said something to them about, oh, that's a funny joke, you're pulling my leg. And the child looked very confused and said, I'm not touching you, I don't understand. They take that very literally. And so if you're working with or living with someone with autism, you have to be careful about the sarcasm and the words that you use because they may take it very literally and may not understand. Understanding appropriate personal space. And so not only can this make it difficult for someone with autism to make friends, because maybe they often are standing just a little too close. If we think about that personal bubble that you have around you, someone with autism doesn't naturally feel or doesn't naturally understand that personal bubble. They might stand a little too close. They might stand a little bit too far away. This is something also that we need to think of in terms of safety concerns for someone with autism, because they don't necessarily understand that it's okay to hug some people. It's not okay to hug other people. You shouldn't be going up to just random people and hugging them. And you need to make sure if a random person comes up to you and wants you to hug them or do something physical with them, that you need to understand where those boundaries are. Understanding how they're perceived by others. And so we talked about that some people have preferred interests and things that they are just really excited about. And sometimes they talk about those things a little bit too much, or sometimes that's the only thing they want to talk about. I worked with a little boy once that loved elevators. He talked about elevators a lot. And he went to the beach with his family over the summer, and when he came back, we said, oh, tell us about the beach. What did you do at the beach? And the only thing that he could talk to us about without us prompting him was the elevator in the hotel and how much he loved the elevator in the hotel. And he had other children in the group with him that while they were sitting listening to it, they would start, They didn't want to hear about the elevator anymore. And he didn't understand those cues that they were giving, that he needed to move on to another subject. And that was one of the things that we worked with him a lot in group, was looking at other people and understanding those social cues that they're giving about when they're tired about hearing certain subjects, and also helping him understand how to talk about other things. To him, that was what was exciting, that was what was important, that was what he was going to talk about. And so we did a lot of work with him on, but there are other things. At the beach, did you go play in the sand? That's exciting too. Did you go in the water? That's exciting too. People want to hear about those things as well, not just the elevator. Making connections between facial expressions and emotions, and I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. And making connections between the way that people act and what they might be thinking. And so that's exactly what I just said. You all know that if you were talking to me and I started going, and started walking away from you, yep, that's great. You understand that cue, that means I need to be somewhere, or I'm done talking, what you're saying isn't interesting me anymore, so I'm gonna walk away. For someone with autism, they might not realize those cues, so they may need help understanding those. And then Gestalt. And what this is basically seeing the forest for the trees. And so people with autism sometimes are very detail-oriented. And sometimes it's appropriate details that they're interested in. But again, sometimes they need to see the big picture, and all they can see are small details of it. And so for some of our children, if we're thinking about their learning skills going into school classrooms, if I show them a picture of a dog and I say, what is it? Are they able to focus on the entire picture of the dog, or are they only seeing the dog's nose, or only seeing where the staple was in the top of the page? For some people with autism, we need to help them learn. We need to teach them to look at the big picture instead of just looking at small details, which again is great in some instances and can help sometimes moving along in life as we're thinking about careers. Careers that are very detail-oriented could be very good for someone with autism because they are aware of those small details. But also, if you think about life, often you need to be looking at the big picture and not just parts of what's going on. So some other things that come easily for some people, for most people, but are difficult for someone with autism. Quieting certain urges. And so this comes back to those stereotyped behaviors that I talked about at the beginning. I've talked a lot about feeling certain textures. Again, some children, they don't like the way certain textures feel and they don't want anything to do with them. For other children, they really like the way some things feel. And so they want to constantly be feeling certain textures, or maybe they want to be constantly picking at their clothing, or picking at strings, or picking at buttons on their clothing. Having motor control, and so for some of our children, they have great motor control. For others, for many children with autism, gross motor and fine motor skills are lacking. And so they might need to see a professional called an occupational therapist. And I'm going to talk more about what an occupational therapist is at the end of this. And then also being able to process all the information that's coming to them at once. And so again, Sophie said she had a really hard time processing all the information that was coming in. The sounds of the air conditioner, the smell in the room, the temperature in the room, the lighting, they often have trouble with processing. And so if you talk to an occupational therapist, sometimes you'll hear them refer to children with autism. And again, this is just to give a nice visual of being more like Tigger or being more like Eeyore. So everybody knows Pooh. Everybody can picture Eeyore if you think about it. Eeyore isn't very up. He kind of walks around at his own pace, does his own thing, isn't overly happy, isn't overly excitable at any given time. And And for Eeyore to be able to accomplish things in life, he probably needs some help getting a little bit up. And so for some children with autism, they fall on that end. They're more slow to move. Their senses are not heightened to the fact that they're jumping constantly, but they're just sort of sitting and not very fast to move from one thing to another. And so for them, we want to be able to bring them up some. And so these are the children that you might see using something like one of those giant yoga balls or therapy balls, where we might sit them on that and bounce them up and down, because we want to bring them up. If they're doing an activity where they have to sit for a long time, we might have them sit on something like this. It's a seat that you just put on your chair, and it's got bumps on top of it. Again, this way, that child that isn't up all the time, they're getting a little bit of stimulation from this, because it's a pillow, so they're going to rock back and forth a tiny bit while they're sitting on it. But also it's got the bumps on it that they're going to get some stimulation from as well. Other children are more on the Tigger side of things. And if you picture Tigger, he's constantly bouncing. He's constantly moving. He has a hard time sitting still. He has a hard time coming down. And so if he were to need to sit for listening to a book or doing a math activity or doing worksheets of some sort in a class, he's probably going to have a really hard time sitting still, because he's just constantly moving. And so for that child, we want to try to do things for them that are going to bring them down, that are going to bring them to be more grounded. And so for children like that, you might see them wearing something like this. This is a weighted vest. I can pass it around for you to feel. It's heavy. And so if you think about, obviously we're all too big to put this on, but if you think about if you were to put this on, again, it would make you a little bit more grounded. It would bring you down some because it's heavy. Another kind of vest that you might see a child wearing is called a compression vest. It looks similar to this, except it's got Velcro that almost, their arms aren't in a straight jacket, but around the middle of them, it almost looks like a straight jacket. It pulls very tight. And so it's going to give them that feeling of constantly having some pressure put on them. Again, because we want to bring those Tiggers down. Imagine if we put that vest on Tigger, or if we put one of these compression vests on Tigger. He's not going to be able to bounce quite as much as he can without it. And so it's helping the children be able to regulate their senses. And I'm sorry, I thought I had slides on here about where I said about understanding the facial expressions, and I must have taken those out. Just to go back to that briefly, if we look at this little girl up here, how does she feel? Happy. If we look at the little boy, how does he feel? Sad, yeah. If you look at me, how do I feel? It's hard to tell. I might be happy. I'm smirking a little bit, but I also might just be angry about something, and that's the way I look. For children with autism, they're kind of seeing all faces that way. Number one, they may not be looking directly at faces, and so they may not see the emotion. But also, they aren't making the connection that a smile means happy and that a frowny face and crying means sad. They also can't necessarily make the connection between them. Like we know what it feels like to be sad. We can probably say a situation that made us sad and understand that other people might have had that experience as well. For someone with autism, they can't necessarily relate in that way. They can't relate that other people have that same emotion that they've had as well. So that makes it difficult as well. Yes?
The tools that you just mentioned, the vest and the other compression vest, like, I guess in a classroom setting, is that like something that's okay with the parents, or how does that work?
That's an excellent question. That's something that is always done under the supervision of an occupational therapist. And so many children with autism, as I said, they're seeing a speech pathologist for the language and social communication. Many are also, especially ones that are far on the end of either really being a Tigger or really being an Eeyore, are likely seeing an occupational therapist. And I'm going to talk about what they are as well. And so we would never just throw one of those vests on a child because I'm not an occupational therapist. And while I understand sensory regulation to a point, I haven't gone to school, I haven't specialized in it, and so I can't make that decision. An occupational therapist would make that decision. That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up, because I didn't talk about that. Okay, so you might hear this phrase, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And that's because, as you probably heard as I've been talking, One of the challenging things with autism is that everyone you meet is different, and everyone has different challenges. Again, some kids are going to be more Tigger, some are going to be more Eeyore, some are going to fall in the middle and not have trouble with that. Some are going to talk, some are not going to talk. Some are going to have more trouble focusing on things than others are. Some are going to be earlier functioning, so they're not going to have as many skills, and then some are going to be higher functioning, and they're going to be able to function in the world, and you might not even know if you saw them out at the playground that they had autism. Every person is different, which makes it challenging for family members and for people that are working with people with autism, because you really have to look at each person as an individual. It can also be very frustrating for families because there is no straight treatment where you can say, this is just what you do. If you have autism, this is just what across the board everybody should do. As I said, the one thing that's known is that early intervention is key, but the type of early intervention that your child gets is going to vary from family to family, so it can be very frustrating. There are a lot of similarities between people with autism and their peers. Everyone's brain works differently. And so as I said that everyone was different, if we think about just all of us, I'm sure we all have different talents. Some people are much more musical, some people are much better at math and sciences, some people are great dancers. It's the same way with people with autism. They all have different talents and struggles. If we think about those stereotyped movements that I mentioned for people with autism, people with autism may move their bodies in different ways, like flapping their arms. And it might make you uncomfortable when you see somebody doing that. It's okay to say that that's making you uncomfortable if you don't necessarily understand it. But if you think about it, we all have things that we do. I see a foot moving up and down back there. So to keep yourself, and I would be doing this too, I'm ready to eat lunch. To keep myself focused on what's going on, maybe you tap your foot, maybe you drum your fingers on the table, maybe you chew on your pencil. We all do these types of things, but for someone with autism, it's just to a different extent, and it just might be in a different way than what we're used to seeing in other people. So if you think about the fact that we do these things to regulate our bodies, they're doing those things to regulate their bodies as well. The flapping and looking at things out of the corner of their eyes is helping them regulate. This is one of the, I put this in a bunch of talks because I love this slide, because I think it's such a good reminder that, especially for children with autism, we see certain behaviors sometimes, and they can seem hard to deal with, and they can seem out of control. But if we think about the fact that all of us go through periods where we behave in ways that we might not be proud of, or just we have frustrations inside of us that we need to get out somehow. That's what's happening for people with autism. And again, if you think about how frustrating it is if you're not able to communicate, as we mentioned, or how frustrating it could be with Sophie that said she needs to bang her head into something sometimes because so much information is going in at once. So I just think it's a nice reminder that all of us have reasons that we get upset at times, and it's the same thing for people with autism. It might just be to a heightened extent for someone with autism. So some things to remember about behaviors is that appropriate behavior is really difficult. Even for us as adults, I'm sure it's hard for you all to just sit here and sit still for 45 minutes to an hour listening to me talk. Imagine how much more difficult it is for a child, any child, that needs to sit for long periods of time for a school class or church or just something where they have to be quiet. Appropriate behavior is difficult. Inappropriate behavior usually receives a really quick response. And so if one of you got up and started running around the room, I will either say something to you about it, or Stacy will stop you when you get to the back and go, can you please leave, or can you please sit down? That's going to get a quick response. But I haven't once said to all of you, gosh, guys, thank you so much for sitting so nicely. You all are doing a really good job sitting. You don't respond to appropriate behavior as quickly as you're going to respond to negative behavior. And especially in a classroom setting, teachers that have a 25 class of kids, what are they going to respond to? They're going to respond to the kid that's causing trouble. They're not always going to respond to the kids that are sitting and behaving appropriately. And children learn very quickly from that. If they want attention and they're not getting it, and they jump up and start running around and they start getting attention for it, they're probably going to keep doing that more. So need to keep that in consideration. That goes along with more attention is often given to inappropriate behaviors than appropriate behavior. And often a child with autism isn't intentionally misbehaving, but rather they're trying to regulate their sensory systems or they're trying to communicate something. Not that there aren't behaviors that occur sometimes, but a lot of times, again, there's a good reason for it. They're trying to communicate or they're trying to regulate their sensory system, or they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. And so we might need to think of new ways to help them. So what can you do to help people who have autism? We'll keep things as predictable as possible. People with autism like a schedule, they like a routine, they like to know what's happening. And so as much as you can keep things predictable, you're going to keep people that you know with autism much more comfortable. Giving lots of warnings if changes are going to occur. So again, people with autism like to know what's happening. It makes them very nervous when changes occur that they don't know about. When we have fire drills here, if I know that they're happening, I can tell you as soon as my kids start walking in the door, I start telling them, there's going to be a loud bell. Okay, in just a few minutes, there's going to be a loud bell. We're at circle time now, but there's going to be a loud bell. They get lots of warnings that something's going to be different. We might need to explain to someone with autism how to behave in certain situations that just come naturally to us. And so if we walk into a library, we probably notice that it's quiet, people aren't running around, people aren't talking loudly. For someone with autism, they may not take those cues. They might need to be told very explicitly, we're going to the library, here's how you behave in a library. Or we're going to a concert and it's going to be loud and people are going to be jumping up and down. Again, they might need to be given warnings for certain situations that come more naturally for us. If you aren't sure how an individual with autism is feeling by their facial expression, again, they may not be making appropriate facial expressions for their feelings. It's okay to ask them. And if they obviously don't know how you are feeling by looking at your face, it's okay to tell them that I'm sad right now. I don't feel like laughing. I don't feel like playing a game. I need to take this moment to be sad. Welcome different ways of communicating with others. So I showed you some of the augmentative communication. Some people also use sign language or gestures to communicate. I mentioned earlier, even if someone with autism isn't looking directly at you, still talk to them and include them in conversations and activities. Allow times for breaks. Understand that situations might be overstimulating for them, and so they might need sensory breaks here and there to get away from loud noises or get away from the bright lights. Keep in mind that a person with autism has trouble reading body language and social cues, and be patient and understanding of that. Again, as we talked about sarcasm, make sure that you understand that someone with autism may take things very literally. And they may ask a lot of questions about what you say, but they're probably just trying to understand and make sure that they're not making a mistake in how they're understanding you. And so be careful about joking and sarcasm with them. Don't keep asking them the same question over and over again. And so sometimes I see people with, again, my experience is mostly with children. So with children saying, where's your lunchbox? Where is it? Where'd your lunchbox go? And they'll just ask them over and over again. If the child's not understanding what you're saying to them, it's only going to be more frustrating to be kind of hammered with that question over and over again. It's also going to be more difficult for them to understand if you keep asking them the question in different ways or telling them in different ways. Sit down, get in your chair, stay in your seat. Just say it the same way. Sit down, and then maybe tap the chair or show them or gently guide them to the chair. They might need more information than just the verbalizations that you're saying to them. Remember that someone with autism might need extra processing time to understand things that are said to them or directions that are given. And try to make questions and directions that you give them as specific as possible. So instead of saying, what do you like about this picture? You could say, oh, what's your favorite color in the picture? Kind of giving them leading questions is helpful. And so just quickly, some different professionals that work with individuals with autism. Doctors, researchers sometimes, teachers, speech-language pathologists, occupational therapists, and social workers are some of the biggies that we usually hear. For doctors and psychologists, they would test, diagnose, prescribe medicine, give recommendations, interview parents as part of diagnosis, make referrals, and then also work on behavioral interventions if the child or individual has severe behaviors. For researchers, they're going to test, oversee studies dealing with autism, take data, write grants, compare different groups of children and adults, design research studies, and write papers based on the research that they do. Occupational therapists, which I spoke of a couple times, are going to help children acquire or regain skills needed to perform daily activities, so dressing, feeding, moving, playing. They might help children with sensory challenges. And in a school setting, they're going to try to help children succeed in a classroom. So they might work on reading, cutting, being able to sit up in a chair, using those vests, as we talked about, or the things that children might need for sensory regulation. Speech language pathologists are going to help people learn or relearn how to motor plan for speech. They might help someone learn how to articulate speech sounds and words and put them together to form sentences. And then also help people learn the rules of social communication. So body language, making eye contact with someone, what it means to have a conversation back and forth. Teachers are going to help children gain age-appropriate cognitive skills, work with other service providers to improve skills on the whole. They might help children gain daily living skills, and then also learning readiness skills, so sitting in a chair, attending to a teacher. And social workers are going to help families gain access to appropriate services, gain access to resources. They might help them through the process of transitioning to school or adulthood, and then help with family issues or concerns as well. They might help to find respite services, so if families need daycare or babysitters or things like that, social workers could be a part of that. So every person's different, and unfortunately there is no easy answer to what the outcome for someone with autism is going to be. Some individuals with autism can live independently, while others will need assistance through adulthood. Some will speak, while others are going to need an alternate form of communication. But all individuals with autism can have fulfilling lives, just in different ways. And so you have to understand what someone's capabilities are and then sort of vary your expectations based on that. So here we do a lot of community outreach, technical assistance, where we go and do trainings in schools. As I mentioned, I do some of that. We have a partnership with the Walters Art Museum. Those of you that are working with families or have family members, this coming Saturday, there's something called a sensory morning at the Walters. If you look at their website, it's on there. We might have a flyer in the back too, where they specifically open the museum early for individuals that have sensory difficulties, and it's a really great program. We do research in public schools. We have an annual conference, which is happening in 2 weeks. We have a bike event, and this is now a Kennedy-wide bike event called Roar that happens in April for fundraising. We have a newsletter that goes out, and if you're interested in being on our newsletter, you can provide your email address to Stacy in the back, and we can get you on our mailing list. We welcome observers and students to come through here as well in any of our programs that people are interested in. In the past, we had a Why Wait and See campaign with the city, where we really tried to get information out to families that were in low socioeconomic status situations, or families that might not readily seek out services on their own. And then we do a lot of community talks and presentations at schools, Port Discovery, and different colleges and universities. So that was a lot of information, but it's the basics. Does anybody have specific questions? And I know we're at the end of our time, but questions about anything that we talked about or anything we didn't talk about?